introduction on today's event, Malcolm and Martin, what they can teach us about faith-driven social change. This event is essentially a Christian-Muslim look into the lives of these two giants in recent history and how their faith informs their respective struggles. And it's also in conjunction with the visit of our respective guests from New York, Imam Khalid Latif, who's sitting over there. Can you give him a round of applause? And if you have a device with you, please feel free to take a picture of anything you want, express yourself, and please put in the hashtag KLAKL, means Khalid Latif in KL. So that's hashtag KL in KL, and also the hashtag exchange verses. The first segment that we would continue with is on Martin Luther King, and our speakers would be Eugene and Debbie from Kairos Dialogue Network. Just a little bit of introduction on who these two eloquent speakers are. So Eugene was the General Secretary of the National Evangelical Christian Fellowship before his current role as Director of Kairos Dialogue Network. Kairos Dialogue Network is a Christian organization that seeks to bring together people of other faiths to seek for the good of each other and for our nation. And Debbie Debbie works in a Christian charity organization based in Petaling Jaya as a communications and advocacy officer, recently completing a master's degree in public policy, and volunteers with Kairos Dialogue Network. Having grown up in a majority Muslim environment, she believes that dialogue and friendship is essential to bring communities together at a time when society is increasingly fragmented. So I would like to welcome Eugene and Debbie to the stage.
Good afternoon to all of you all. Can you hear me? I'm just wondering whether it's soft. But thank you very much, and selamat sejahtera to all of you. Salam. Indeed, it's my privilege to be here this afternoon. Just a couple of weeks ago, Justin and myself, we were in the same seminar hall, and I just so happened to mention in one of the seminars the name of Martin Luther King, and we were talking a little bit about it. And after the seminar, Justin approached me and said, "Hey Eugene, actually I'm very thankful that you actually raised this thing about Martin Luther, because I had in mind this seminar which is at the end of July." And so we started talking about it, and this afternoon I'm very grateful that I'm here to be able to share a little bit with you about the life of Martin Luther King. So thank you very much, Brother Justin, for raising this. I think this is a very important occasion. This is a very honorable occasion, and it's also a very nice occasion to talk about two very important figures, especially during the very tension period of the 1960s in the United States of America, and also to see where we can learn from these two giants of faith. So thank you very much. I must admit one thing, that Martin Luther was my hero, one of my favorite heroes, Christian heroes, simply because we see the character of what he did, and he was able to stand for what he believed in. And I think more recently, you will see that Hollywood is beginning to bring a lot of this character to life in their movies. I'm just wondering, how many of you have seen the show Selma? And then lately, there's also another show, but actually it depicts the life of President Lyndon B. Johnson all the way, or something like that. Alright, so it's quite new. So if you have seen the show, you'll see that Hollywood is actually beginning to depict the lives of these giants and what it means for the history of America. But I think this afternoon, rather than looking at the heroic figure of people like Martin Luther King and maybe afterwards the figure of Malcolm X, I thought that it'd be good if we just don't look at the heroic aspects of it, but we look at their life, what they really represent through their writings, through their speeches. And hopefully by looking at their writings and their speeches, we begin to actually capture, in essence, what they really stand for and what they mean and what and why they do certain things. So this afternoon, I don't propose to do the talking. What I'm trying to do is that I'm trying to let the man speak for himself, although we know that the man is no longer here, but his legacy, his writings, his speeches are all there. So we are going to look a little bit into his writings so that we can let Martin Luther speak for himself as though he is here present with us, and then we can draw some conclusions from it, and from there we will be able to see what really made them tick, why is the motivation for faith-driven social change. So that's the approach that I'm going to take this afternoon. So to begin with, to do away with all the heroes, let's look at what the man himself. And we have that. Maybe it's easier if I can just stand. Let's look a bit about the man himself. He was born in 1929. You can see a little bit of his biography. And I was actually quite surprised in my recent years when I look at the life of Martin Luther King. He was actually from an upper middle class family. So unlike the African Americans who were suffering in the South, who were actually from the poorer class, Martin Luther King was actually from the upper middle class. That tells us a lot about him. He came from a more privileged family. And he lived in that part of Atlanta, although considered the South. But it was actually a more prosperous side of Atlanta at that point in time. He was, of course, a Baptist minister, and his great-grandfather was a Baptist minister, so he came from a line of a Christian minister. And of course, coming from the tradition and the family line of Christian preachers, he went to the Bible school and eventually did his doctorate in Christian studies at Boston University. So that's a little bit about the man. But as we look at the man, what makes him, undertake all this social change that we have come to appreciate and come to know him about? Something like this. To understand him, I think we have to understand King in three ways. Firstly, of course, Christian theology, because he is a Christian minister, informs him what he really do and why he stands for certain things. But he was also enveloped in a situation, a very difficult situation during Americans' history. So I call it, his social activism is also driven by the situation that we see around him, the context that we see around him. And then thirdly, we see that not just theology, his Christian beliefs, not just his situation or his context, but he also was very firm in certain methods. So that method also inspire him and motivate him towards social activism, social change. So to understand King, we have to look at him from three angles: his Christian belief, the situation around him, and what is his methods. And from there, this afternoon, what I hope to do is that from his speeches, from his sermons, I hope to be able to draw out what are the motivation and what are the basis on which he actually engages in the social change of America in the 60s. That's what we're going to do. So let's look a little bit about his Christian belief. Next. Firstly, this is from a speech that was given during his time. It's called a drum major instinct, and you can see in that speech he says this now. And he was addressing the poor African Americans who was oppressed, and he said this to them: "You are out of place. You are selfish." Jesus, because he was speaking to the Christian crowd, says that something quite different. "Oh, I see you want to be first. You want to be great. You want to be important, you want to be significant. Well, you ought to be if you are going to be my disciples. Again, he was addressing a Christian crowd. And then he says this, you must be. But he, and that is what King is saying is that Jesus reorders priorities, and he says this, yes, don't give up that instinct. It's good instinct if you use it right. It's good instinct if you don't distort it and pervert it. Don't give it up. Keep feeling the need for being important. Keep feeling the need for being first. But I want you to be first in love. I want you to be first in moral excellence. I want you to be first in generosity. That is what I want you to do. And so, picture yourself. King was actually addressing the people who was oppressed. And these people say, I want significant. But King tells them, no, yes, it's right, you want significant. But your significant is different. Your significant is first in love, first in moral excellence, first in generosity. And why? Why did he say that? It's because of his vision of God. Next. And so, what can we look, as we look at a speech like that, what can he tell us about King? It tells us one very important. King's God is a moral God of just purpose and dignity. So, because he has this vision, because he believes in this God, a God who has a moral purpose, a God who has dignity and uphold human dignity, that's the reason why it drove him to social change. Number two, King's God is a personal God. He looks at God, and it informs him that it is a personal God. It is a God who loves his people. It is a God who cares for his people and who wants the best for his people. And because of that, he was able to tell his people, it's alright. It's okay for you to be, to have this desire to be significant, to be first. But first not in violence, but first in love, first in moral excellence, first in generosity. And that is the vision that drove King to do what he's doing. And this comes because of his vision and his belief in the God that he worships. That's Martin Luther King for you as relates to his vision of God. Number two, let's look a bit of the life situation. Like I said, three things, his belief, life situation, and method. Now we are looking at the life situation. And this is how King defines the problem. Again, this is a speech that he was speaking to his people. Remember, he was a Christian preacher, so he was preaching to his church. And this is what he says. And he was giving a story. And this is what he says, the story. And you look at the way he described the story. Very poignant description of what America was all about in the 60s. He says this is a white man who refused to cross the gulf of segregation and lift the Negro brother to the position of first-class citizens. Now again, he was speaking to his fellow African Americans. And he says this is the white man who refuses to cross the gulf of segregation and lift the Negro brother to the position of first-class citizens. This is the Indian Brahmin who refuses to bridge the gulf between himself and his brother. Okay, remember, he was speaking to the people who are oppressed. And this is the American capitalist who never seeks to bridge the economic gulf between himself and the laborer. And so, what was King doing? As far as the situation is concerned, King recognized the situation that his people was in, his brothers was living in. And he was defining the problem. He was defining the problem in the sense that there is now a gap between the white man and the Negroes, the rich and the poor. And he was telling the people, yes, this is the problem. This is the problem. And while he defines the problem, did he just stop there? Let's look what else he says. Now, because of the problem, we see that there is this question of racial discrimination, segregation, inequality in stature and resources in America in the 1960s. And those of you who know the famous incidents in King's life, the Montgomery bus strike, the boycott, because of one lady, Rosa Parks, because she refused to give a seat in the bus seat and she was sitting in front. Those of you who know the assault on Edmund Pettus Bridge, those of you who've seen Selma, you remember what the Edmund Pettus Bridge is all about, because it was a march from the small town of Selma to the capital of Alabama in Montgomery. So it was a peaceful march, but the police brutality, the police beat up the marchers. And then, of course, the Watt race riot in Los Angeles, the Watt neighborhood, it is reported that 34 people died. But I think thousands of people were injured because of a race riot, or because of a drunken arrest by the police of a drunken Negro. So that was the situation. So violence was going around because of this racial segregation and inequality that was taking place. But the question we need to ask ourselves is this: what did King do? What did King do in the midst of this segregation, in the midst of this racial riot and violence that was taking place? Let's look at what he did. This is his aspiration. And again, this is a sermon speaking to his people. We are here this evening for serious business. Maybe we are here this afternoon for serious business as well. Alright? We are here in a general sense because first and foremost, we are American citizens and we are determined to apply the citizenship to the fullness of the meaning. Remember, the situation was, the race riot was going on, the segregation was going on, the inequality was going on, and he has defined the problem due to the white man. And this is what he says: we are here in a general sense because first and foremost we are Americans and we are determined to apply the citizenship to the fullness of meaning. We are here also because of our love for democracy, because of our deep-seated belief that democracy transformed from thin paper to take action is the greatest form of government on earth. And then he says this: if we are incarcerated behind the iron curtains of a communist nation, we couldn't do this. If we were dropped in the dungeons of a totalitarian regime, we couldn't do this. But the great glory of American democracy is the right to protest for right. So, remember, oppressed, racial riots taking place, King didn't just sit down and do nothing. He appealed to the people. And he appealed to universal values like democracy and the right to protest. And so the situation, like I say, we are here to ask the question: what drove Martin Luther King to social change? Firstly is the vision. His vision, his Christian beliefs. Secondly is the situation. His situation drove him to social change. Next. And what was his motivation? Well, democracy, protest, what motivated him? And he, on one occasion, he has this to say: he said, the way of acquiescence lead to moral and spiritual suicide. And this is where he agreed with Malcolm X. And that's why we have this photo just now, where a historic moment where Martin Luther King met with Malcolm X to discuss what can they do for the nation, for society of America at that time. And then he also said this: this call for a worldwide fellowship that lives neighborly concerns beyond one tribe, race, class, and nation is in reality a call for all-embracing and unconditional love for all men. This often misunderstood and misinterpreted concept has now become an absolute necessity for the survival of man. That drove him. The situation was so desperate. He feels that we must now talk about not differences, but we must now talk about commonality. We must go beyond one's tribe, race, class, and nation, because and in favor of a call for all-embracing, unconditional love for all men. And this has become an absolute necessity. Why? If not, we will kill each other. And that's what King was telling his people. Next. Yeah, thanks. And so, why struggle? Why struggle for the good of all people, irrespective of tribe, race, and religion? And this is what King says. This innate worth referred to in the phrase, the image of God is universally shared in equal portion by all men. There is no graded scale of essential worth. There is no divine right of one race which differs from the divine right of another. Every human being has attached in his personality the indelible stamp of the Creator. And so King said, you may be a white man, I may be a black man. You may be a Muslim, I may be a Christian. I may be a Christian, you may be a Hindu, and so on and so forth. But at the end of it all, what are we? We are all human beings, isn't it? We are all human beings created by our Creator and Maker. And so, we need to care and we need to love one another. Next. So, few insights into King. Firstly, from all this we can deduce this, that King's ideal of humanity is not a you, me, we, them dichotomy, but he embraces an inclusive, relationally and mutuality of all of us vision. So his idea, as you can see from the life situation, from his speeches, King's thinking was such that what drove him towards social change, to include even the whites, is this thinking. It's not a you, me. It's not a we, them. But it's all of us. All of us, irrespective of who we are. Secondly, King was motivated to his activism based on the human dignity and equal worth of all persons and the love for all mankind. Not constrained and confined to his own, but others too. He had every reason to hate the white men, the Americans, the white Americans. But he didn't. He says we must love them. Why? Because we are all human beings. And if we are going to kill each other, there will be no future for each and every one of us. That is the reason that, and what motivated him towards his form of social change. So that's life situation. Thirdly, this is a example, again, one of the sermons that he preached to his people on Christmas Day, and he says this: we shall match your capacity to inflict suffering by our capacity to endure suffering. We will make your physical force with your soul force. Do to us what you will, and we will still love you. Bomb our homes and threaten our children, and as difficult as it is, we will still love you. Send your hooded perpetrators to violence in our communities at the midnight hour, and drag us out of some wayside road, and leave us half dead as you beat us, and we will still love you. We will wear you down by our capacity to suffer, and one day we will win our freedom. And so he was telling his people who was oppressed, who was being dragged to the streets, and beaten up. He says, we need to love you. Why? At the end of the day, we are all human beings. If we are going to persist like that, we are just going to kill each other. And so King is telling his people, love one another because we are all human beings with human dignity. Next. Let's look at his method now, very quickly. And this is what he says. The way of violence leads to bitterness in the survivor and brutality in the destroyer. The way of non-violence leads to redemption and the creation of a beloved community. So if you know a little bit of the life of Martin Luther King, one of the things that stamped out was this. He was an advocate of non-violence. And why he advocated non-violence? We all know he was heavily influenced by Gandhi. In fact, this quotation he says is actually from one of his writings. It's in his journal and his diary. He records it, my trip to the land of Gandhi. He was influenced by Gandhi. But by the time King went to Gandhi, Gandhi was already not alive, he was dead. But the legacy of Gandhi made such an impact to King that forced him or caused him to say this statement. And then he says this, what is love? Love is understanding, redeeming goodwill for all men, having disinterested love, a love which the individual seek not his own good, but the good of his neighbor. 2, a focus on the need of the other person. 3, a willingness to sacrifice in the interest of mutuality. And 4, a recognition of the fact that all life is related. And so, love and non-violence is actually part and parcel of his methods. And next. Is it working? The next 2 slides, I'm going to show you some examples from King's life. That he was not just a preacher of non-violence, of love, but he was also a doer of non-violence and love. This is real. During the Montgomery bus boycott, King was receiving something like 30 to 40 threats per day and a plot to assassinate and take his life. And King said this. He said this to his friends. You see, if one day you find me sprawl out dead, I do not want you to retaliate with a single act of violence. I urge you to continue possessing with the same dignity and discipline you have shown so far. I'm just wondering, if any of us get 30 to 40 threats and assassination, can we say that? Something that challenged me as I prepared this. Next. On January 1956, his house was bombed, and where police suggested that he brought this fate upon himself and family. When the police attempting to clear the street an angry crowd, King diffused the tense atmosphere by saying, "Don't get your weapons. He who lives by the sword will perish by the sword. Remember that is what God said. We are not advocating violence. We want to love our enemies. I want you to love your enemies. Love them and let them know that you love them." Again, if our homes were to get bombed, I wonder what we will say. What we say if our families were in trouble, what we will say. What we will say. And so, what do we see from King? Next. Next. Love for all was the motivation for King's activism, while non-violence was his methods of protest. Next. King's trajectory of love therefore leads to reconciliation, while the trajectory of sectarianism and hate leads to division and ultimate destruction. And so we see that that's why that's motivated King. Because if you fight and I fight you, if I, fight violent with violent, he believed that it's going to destroy America, it's going to destroy the society, and there's no future for anyone. And so King instead advocated non-violence, and he advocated love as his motivation. And so that's what we see in King. And lastly, we want to move from, of course, Martin Luther King lived in a very different culture, in a very different time from what we have in Malaysia here. And so what we want to do now is to see this. Next. We want to move from King to Malaysia. What are some concluding remarks? I think firstly, if there's anything that we can learn from King is this. We need to preserve the ideals of Malaysian life, celebrating diversity and maintaining harmony. I'm sure you all know the phrase that Malaysia truly Asia. I know we are not in Pelancongan now, but I'm sure you know something about that, right? You think about it. Why did people say Malaysia truly Asia? There must be some truth in it, isn't it? Okay, whatever else you believe, the jargons or the phrases or the what the media will say. But think about it, Malaysia truly Asia. Think about it. There must be some truth in people saying this isn't Malaysia truly Asia. And I believe that why people say Malaysia truly Asia is simply this, because Malaysia has diversity of life and Malaysia has harmony. And so this is our ideal as Malaysian. Irrespective of whether we are Christian or Muslim, we must all maintain this harmony, this ideal of diversity. Because if we are going to accuse each other, be suspicious of each other, at the end of the day, what King has taught us is this. We are just going to tear each other apart and kill each other. That cannot be, isn't it? That cannot be. Next. What can we learn from King? Sorry. Seeking mutuality and solidarity. The all of us as opposed to we and them. And so what must we do? We must avoid labeling and build relationship and trusted community. We have seen this today. We have seen this in our Malaysian life. There are plenty of I label you, you label me. You is this, I is this. That's no good. And if ever King is going to teach us something, he's going to teach us that in his time, he didn't label anybody. He didn't say, I am the blacks, I'm suffering, you are the... Instead, he went the way of love. Let's love and embrace each other for the good of society. And lastly, if King is going to teach us anything about social change, it is this. True religion must bring reconciliation and healing. Religion is not to divide people, but reconciliation and healing. The practice of love and accepting one another. And so, very urgent. You may be a Muslim, I may be a Christian, we all are different religious faith, but true religion, irrespective of whether we are Christian or Muslim, whether Islam or Christianity, our religion must practice love, accept one another, and we must dispel the polarization that is taking place in religion. And so, with this very simple and humble presentation, I hope that it's been Martin Luther King Jr. has inspired you for a better Malaysia, Malaysia truly Asia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brother Eugene. Check. Hello, everybody. My name is Debbie. First of all, Shalom. Greetings of peace. Shalom basically means Damai Sejahtera in Bahasa Malaysia. That's what I'm told from the Sabahan pastor recently. Can you all hear me from the back? Okay. Thank you especially to the organizers. Thank you, Justin. Also, we want to thank Imam Khalid Latif for agreeing to be with us and dialogue with us and engage with us. We are very privileged to share this friendship with the Muslim community. Today I was asked to actually engage in conversation with Eugene. And I told him that I'm going to ask him difficult questions. So it'll be very interesting for you all, I hope. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you guys a bit of insider story into the Christian community, right? Because you may not get this all the time, you know. So I'm going to tell you this, and it may surprise you, that Christians are very familiar with our spiritual heroes, like C.S. Lewis, John Stott, G.K. Chesterton, Billy Graham. And if you know who these people are, they are, you know, mostly Western white. Don't know why it's that way. But when it comes to MLK Jr. and someone else by the name of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Dietrich Bonhoeffer planned to assassinate Hitler and was executed. The Christian community kind of tiptoes around or shies away from people like MLK Jr. and Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And, you know, I'll ask Eugene why that's the case a bit later on. But we can see in their lives that they did not only preach or teach theology and Christianity, but they actually acted upon what they teach to bring about change in society. And so what you heard today, what we all heard today, is something that even Christians, we don't grapple with or we don't hear a lot. And I'm personally learning myself. And for these Christians, such as MLK Jr., it's not just about private piety. You know, it's not just about being a good person. It's actually about public morality as well. It's also about a just society as well they hope to see on earth. And I believe that Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, they drew people not just to be activists, but also to the Bible, to the Quran. Through the actions, they showed what they believed Islam and Christianity was. And they have communicated this through their actions. Now, for MLK Jr., and this is another thing, this funny thing that I want to share with you all, is that the only time that we hear of Martin Luther King Jr. is when we need to search for a quote online, you know, a quote online. And then okay, I need this quote about social justice. Yeah, maybe I need this quote about social justice, and so I Google search Martin Luther King. So we all of us, and I'm really grateful to Eugene, who has really shared, and we have dwelt deeply on this matter, right? A few points about MLK Jr. that strikes me as concluding as well from Brother Eugene's presentation. He came from a good background, a place of privilege, healthy family relations, good education actually, a variety of education. He was in a fully black school, in his junior school, as well as a mixed school as well. And he did really well. He was the president of the student body in a predominantly white class, we know. He was also a pastor, and he actually used his background to preach three kinds of messages. One against violence, one on racial justice or against racial injustice, and also one more on poverty or wealth inequality. And he spoke very strongly on these matters. And truly, he is a fascinating figure, a remarkable figure as well. Now, Brother Eugene, despite his staggering achievements, why is MLK Jr. a less prominent figure in Christian circles? What is it that makes him, or rather makes us uncomfortable about him?
Thank you. I told Debbie just now before the start of this session, I told her, I said, please don't go and ask me all the hard questions. So obviously she didn't listen to me. So now we have this hard question. Now, it is true that, it's breaking up again. It is true that the general Christian public don't consider people like that. Let me tell you, I myself also never read King when I was growing up as a Christian, so I want to confess that as well. No, but why I eventually read King and he became sort of my hero was simply because like King of the situation that we see in Malaysia, and so we is also propelled by the situation, but. Generally, the Christian community, we always think about things like heaven. You become a Christian to say, oh, we want to go to heaven. So we read writings like that inspires to be good Christians so that we can go to heaven. Generally, the other part of the Christian community also is such that we think about, okay, how can we do good? We help the poor, we help the underprivileged, and that's about it. But rarely do we want to talk about injustice. Why? How many of us would, as I said, I shared just now, how many of us would, and Christians, I'm talking about Christians, how many of the Christians would be willing to say, hey, when my house got bombed, or when I get 30 or 40 threats, I will say to my people, it's okay. If I'm dead, please carry on with the fight. It's a very unnatural thing to do. It is a very costly thing to do. And so, Christians in general, we have to admit that we are fearful. We are fearful that of this cost. We are fearful of the consequences to our family. And this is a very natural thing. And so, we don't like to read characters like that, because characters like that tells us that they are going against the natural, they are very unnatural. So we don't like to hear these kind of things. But nevertheless, it's still a very important thing to hear. It's still a very important thing to learn, because it is by their examples and it is by their sacrifices. I think, Imam Khalid will tell you, both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, both of them were assassinated and their life ended. They were quite young. King was not even 40 when he died, when he was assassinated. And I think Malcolm X also was assassinated. These people paid with their life for what they believe in. But as a result of which, they left a legacy for a better of America. So that is something that I think we need to learn, we need to hear as well. Although we recognize that it's very difficult, it's very uncomfortable for us, but something important.
Okay, my second question, Brother Eugene, is when looking at MLK and applying it to our current context, if you look at the Christian majority, or even for example, our East Malaysia brothers and sisters in Sabah and Sarawak, who are mostly Christians, we are seeing a minority within a minority, so to speak. And when I look at the case of Martin Luther King Jr., he was the minority and his audience was the majority, right? Which is the majority group. And I realized in his speeches that he appeals to a common text that speaks to the conscience of both majority and minority. It's a common text that's actually shared, and this is the Bible. If you read his speech of I Have a Dream and the Nobel lecture, he makes a lot of these kinds of references, and this brings up something emotionally for the hearer, because you are using passages from the Bible that I identify with. So this is what Martin Luther King Jr. had at his disposal. So my question is, if we were to speak, or if a minority community were to speak for themselves in a country such as Malaysia, do we have such a common text that reverberates through every sub-community in Malaysia? Do we have that?
Just let me add. Although it's true that King appealed to the Bible, because both for the American whites and the Negroes, they were Christians. But the other thing that actually, as I attempted to demonstrate, King did not just appeal to the Bible as a context. You read all his writings, it's very clear. He appealed, in addition to the Bible, he appealed to the great American document of the Declaration of Independence by Thomas Jefferson, and he appealed to the great American Constitution that highlights the universal practice of democracy. Just now in one of the slides I tried to demonstrate. So he wasn't just looking at the religious text. He was looking at the Declaration of Independence. He was looking at the Constitution of the American Constitution, which says that equality to all mankind. Now, the reason why he was appealing to this great American documents was not so much the documents was important, that's important too, but more important than the document was, he was referring to the great values, the universal values of equality, the universal values of human dignity, the universal values of democracy, where every one of us have a right and the freedom to express, to protest, and to determine what is good for ourselves. So King, yes, Bible, but King also referred to the great values, the universal values. And I think this is something that maybe we Malaysians, Malaysia is a diverse country. Yes, there's Muslims, there's Hindus, there's Christians, there's Buddhists and all. All of our scriptures are different. But I think looking beyond just the differences, we are also Malaysians who espouse the great universal values of diversity. We also espouse the great universal values of equality. We also espouse the great universal values of freedom to determine what is good for ourselves. And I think maybe for us Malaysians, this is what we need to take hold, harness the potential in it for the good of Malaysian society. As I just said in my concluding slides just now, think of it. There must be something true about the phrase, Malaysia, truly Asia, isn't it? Because in that phrase, there is this great value of diversity where we all can determine what is good for Malaysian society. Don't let that be hijacked by some people or some politician or party or whatever. But together, Muslim, Christians, Hindu, Buddhists, whatever, we all have this great value of fitness as human beings.
Thank you. And my final question. Okay. In your presentation, there was a lot of discussion about MLK Jr.'s. He talks about love a lot, and I read one of his books, Strength to Love, which is quite life-changing, I would say. But there are so many definitions of love today. We have the Hollywood brand of love. We have the psychopath's approach to love, which is stalker-ish. We have I love chocolate. So what is this love that Martin, how do we define this love? What does this love look like?
Okay. I think I referred to one of the slides. To put it very simply, of course, Martin Luther was against the psycho kind of love. That's very clear. He was obviously talking above or beyond the love of chocolates and all that kind of thing, although I also love chocolates. Right? I think his love was simply this: loving those who are different from you. Let me repeat. To sum it up, I think his love was this: loving those who are different from you. He was challenging his people. Remember, he was a preacher. He was challenging his people and saying, yeah, We all are suffering. We are being oppressed. But do we love? It's easy to love those around us, those of us who are oppressed. But he was challenging the people. Can I love the white man who is oppressing you, who is dragging you out of your homes and beating you, who is depriving you of jobs, who is depriving you of wealth, and who was treating you as some second-class citizens, mainly because of the color of your skin? And so he was challenging these people. You truly am a Christian, you must love. But he was telling them, would you be able to love as a true Christian, even those who oppress you, even those who discriminate you, and even those who deprive you of the job and wealth? And that's the challenge that King gave his people. And I think this is a challenge that I think to a large extent also applies to us. At least it applies to me, because I ask myself the question, if someone were to bomb my house, or I get death threat 30, 40 times during a season, I don't know whether I can love my enemies or not. But that's something that I think King left for us to learn and to be inspired by.
Thank you. It reminds me of some of Jesus' words about loving those who persecute us. Actually, it's loving our enemies and praying for those who persecute us. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Shazana. I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah. Just before we leave here, may I take this opportunity to thank Justin once again for organizing this, and Imam Khalid here. Unfortunately, I will not be able to have the opportunity to hear you. I actually told Debbie that I would really love to hear what you have to say, the motivation behind Malcolm X, because we don't really hear so much about it. But unfortunately, I have another appointment which I have to rush up to. Initially, I thought that today I was free, but then I suddenly looked at my diary, and then suddenly I found out, oh, God, I double booked myself. So I'm in this very difficult predicament. So my humble apologies, I have to miss the session after this, although I would love to really hear. But my assistant is here to take down notes on you. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Mr. Eugene, for coming. It's really inspiring. I love that love rules everything. I mean, it's just about love. Okay, now I would like to invite Imam Khalid to the stage to talk about El Hajj Malik Shabazz, or Malcolm X, and also Wan Ahmad Fayshal to the stage. Yes. So, I'll let
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah. So, I think it's important to frame this conversation in a reality that unfortunately still exists within the context of the United States. Because to understand figures like Malcolm X or Martin Luther King Jr. in a vacuum takes away from the opportunity for us to really gain at a maximum level what it was that they stood for, because we don't understand what it was they were actually standing against. You want to really be able to reflect upon what the reality was for black people and what it still is for black people, not only in the United States, but in many parts of the world, where systems of inequity, systems of oppression, systems of injustice run rampant. And they don't exist just in terms of individual interactions where people are calling each other's names on the street, but systemic and structural racisms, institutionalized policies whose sole purpose is to do nothing other than infringe upon the civil liberties and rights of minority populations. And the challenge is when the world is becoming a much smaller place and our societies are becoming more diverse, we run into the challenge then that there's not a foresight, right? The country that I come from has the issue of dealing with the fact that it's going to become a minority-majority country soon. And you see the kind of rhetoric that comes out of major parties politically in that country, and the kind of worries and anxieties that people have globally, where I've been in Malaysia for 3 days, and every person that I've sat down and had a more intimate conversation with has said to me, "What's really up with that Trump guy?" And we could care less what happens in your country, but now we're worried that if he's president, what's going to happen to us in our country. But the thing with oppression and injustice is that when it goes unchecked, and it exists just in small doses, it builds itself up. And then it's such a mechanism that it doesn't really discriminate who it is that it oppresses against. If you have never sat down and had a conversation with a black person, it doesn't mean that you don't have a perspective on black people. At the end of this conversation, hopefully one of the things that you'll walk away with is some sense of introspection that understands our ability to take on challenges that Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X stood against then, and unfortunately we still stand against today globally, has to be looking inside of your heart and really assessing for yourself what it is that you have as perceptions of those that are different from you. If I was to ask you right now, what do you think of black people? What is your immediate understanding of someone who is black? Are you the type of person who, if you saw someone with a different race or ethnicity walk by your car, you might lock the door? Would you let somebody into your home and share a meal at your dinner table? Or would you let your child marry somebody of a different race or ethnicity? Or not even a different race or ethnicity. If your kid came home and said, "I just met the person who is the man, the woman of my dreams. They make me feel like I'm on top of the world and a much better person. And by the way, their skin color is not the same as ours." Would you be celebratory and let your child marry them? This is not an issue of theology and religion alone. Faith-driven social change is one aspect and frame of what they had going on. First and foremost, to understand the reality of what these two individuals and many others, but primarily they as giants, were speaking again, you have to understand historically what it was like for black people in the United States. Many of them, through justification of religious text, were taken from their homes, put onto boats where many of them died, and brought to a country against their will to be purely slave labor. Racism against individuals is not just name-calling, but these were people who were held down and purposely humiliated to be able to psychologically be enslaved as well as physically enslaved. Black people were not seen as humans, and in much of the United States and in much of the world, they are not still seen as equivalent to other people. When you watch things on television, when you watch things in movies, it's not to be desensitized, but to understand there are people like us who are still treated this way. They have families, they have children, they have names, they have narratives. And if you think about them just in a box that is unfamiliar, it's not going to really help the situation. Slaves weren't allowed to own anything or possess anything, but they were possessed. They were considered to be possessions. A person could literally say that I own another human being. They were given no mechanism of defense whatsoever. So where their white counterparts and slave masters could have weaponry, guns, swords, etc., black people were not allowed to have any system of defense. Marriages were not seen as valid between slaves. And so 2 black slaves could marry each other in the United States. But their white masters did not see that as a valid marriage, and it allowed for them, with a different sense of ease and facility, to then separate families without any sense of real grief or any sense of dismay, because they weren't people, so their family structure wasn't a valid family structure. If any system of crime was implemented or engaged, black people had no rights. There was no distinction between petty theft or anything that was more egregious. A crime by a black person during that period was more likely than not punishable by execution and death whatsoever. Whereas white people could do whatever they wanted to black people, and there was no consequence at times. Literally, white men, without any filter, could rape black women all the time. When it came time to feed black slaves, their white masters with regularity just lay out food on the ground, call them forward to eat from trays on the ground. No utensils, nothing. Children would be given opportunity, and they were literally treated like animals. You had white people take black men and women and literally walk them around on the streets with no clothing, just bare naked. Public humiliation. They would call them things like boy, even if they were grown men, stronger than they were, to be able to create a certain psychological mindset that said you are literally beneath me. I don't disagree with the previous speakers, don't get me wrong. I'm just trying to set context for you. Even the documents that they talked about, I've held many of those documents in my hands, the originals. I have a lot of connections, a lot of networks, I'm given access to certain things. The Bill of Rights, the Constitution of the United States, literally the original documents I've held in front of me. Many of these documents, as slavery was quote-unquote leaving itself, and there was transformation, black people still weren't seen as equals. The value and worth of a black man in comparison to a white man was literally embedded into the fundamental documents of the country that said they were equivalent to less than a whole person. Separation was not such that, well, here are white people and here are black people, but it was just a distinct way of being able to, again, further humiliate and psychologically engage and subjugate. So it wasn't, this is the space for you and this is the space for us, but here is where we will be, and because you cannot be where we are, you have to go and be someplace else. You sit on the back of the bus. You drink from other water fountains. You eat in the back of the restaurants. You can't even come into the restaurants. Take your food to go. Don't walk in through the main door of the hotels. Don't walk in through the main doors of the offices. Don't walk in through the main doors of any of the shopping centers. Go through separate exits. Go through the service areas. Go through where we pick up the garbage from. And it still exists today. When Obama became president of the United States, first time, the number of people who joined white supremacist groups in the United States shot up like crazy. They just couldn't handle the fact that a black man was their president. The systemic and structural racisms that exist, even till today, are beyond problematic. Why I want to say this to you to set a context for you is because neither of these two men in their time were actually seen by the greater establishment as anything good. See, where we're at and what was the key point that says that we only engage through sound bites and quotations. Our understanding of many individuals becomes eisegetical in its analysis. We take key words, sound bites we don't understand an entire life, and we utilize it to just be able to justify and frame a certain argument, right? For those of you who are Muslim, or you're not even in Christian theology and Christian exegesis or Jewish or whatever, wherever you have text and scripture, most of our traditions utilize exegetical analysis in the engagement of text. We read books and we derive meaning from them. This is tafsir. What a lot of us do today is more eisegetical in its analysis. We have an argument, and then we find a verse from a book, we find a narration of a pious individual, and we say, look, this is how we prove something.